and we got back to the huts there, and well, everything was okay, except for the fact we didn't have much food.
Welcome to Polar Podcasts, where you'll hear stories from geologists who've spent their careers, their lives, exploring and studying the remarkable and remote geology of Greenland. Why did they become fascinated with Greenland? What were the problems and the discoveries that drove them? And what was it like working in these remote places, where few people venture, even now? I'm Julie Hollis. In this episode, we hear from Kent Brooks, Emeritus Professor from the Geological Museum in Copenhagen, about how his 50-year career studying the geology of Greenland was kindled, and about his first, very memorable field season in East Greenland in 1965.
Yeah, my name is Kent Brooks. I was born in Kendal in the north of England, in what in that time was the county of Westmoreland, and it's on the edge of the Lake District National Park and the Yorkshire Dales National Park. So I spend a lot of time out of doors as a youngster. My interest in geology probably stems from the fact that my great-grandfather came from Ireland to work in the copper mines at Coniston, and his brother also came from Ireland to the lead mines in Swaledale. And when I was a little boy, my grandmother had a large specimen of fluorite on the windowsill, with cubes of purple fluorite about 1 centimetre on edge. And I was fascinated by these shining crystals. And while I don't know what influence it had on me, I remember it very clearly, and it probably had some sort of influence. Also, we used to spend a lot of time when I was a youngster exploring the old slate mines at the head of Kentmere, and there's also some copper mines there which we looked at. Well, I went to a local grammar school, and then to Manchester University, and there my interest in Greenland was first kindled, because my professor was Professor W.A. Deer, who at that time was a household name among geologists because of his work on the Skaergård intrusion in East Greenland.
The Skaergård intrusion, discovered by Bill Wager in 1931, is a remarkable, pristine layered magma chamber that was fundamental in key developments of understanding of how magmas behave and crystallize in the earth.
The famous memoir, Wager and Deer, and we were always told a lot about his exploits in Greenland, and also the fact that he'd done other things too. He'd explored in Ellesmere Land, for example, coincidentally. Anyhow, we'd learned about Greenland from him. He was always telling us about his exploits in Greenland and the Northern and the Arctic, and it rather fascinated me. When I graduated, I was thinking of going to do geophysics at Imperial College, but Professor Deer nobbled me and said, you wouldn't do that if I were you. And by that time they'd given me some textbooks I was supposed to read over the course of the summer, and these textbooks were such things that said, began by saying, consider the Schrödinger equation, and then there were pages and pages of algebra, and I thought really, when Deer suggested this was not for me, I readily agreed with him. He said, I'll talk with my pal Wager in Oxford and get you, he's starting a new geochemistry course, you can go and do that. I mean, those were the days when you were advanced by somebody you knew, who knew somebody else, and they recommended you. There were no interviews and form filling and all that sort of thing, and qualifications. It didn't matter what qualifications you had. If your sponsor thought you were okay, then he would they would take you on. Well, anyhow, I moved to Oxford and did the geochemistry course, which was quite exciting, and that means I got an interest in geochemistry. I worked at Harwell in the atomic energy place there, and when I'd finished my PhD, it's called the D.Phil at Oxford, when I'd finished my D.Phil, I got a job running the radiochemistry lab in the department in Oxford, and at that time we were obsessed with looking at the geochemistry of obscure elements, and we used neutron activation analysis to determine very, very low levels of elements, rare elements, and we applied this to the rocks of the Skaergård intrusion, of course, among other things. Well, so my first publication was in radiochemistry, and I was rather fascinated by the possibility of using radioactive elements in the earth sciences. After I'd been in Oxford for a little while, a group of us decided we'd like to go and see Greenland, because we'd been in contact with Professors Deer and Wager, and it had raised our interest. And so we put together under the auspices of the Oxford University Exploration Club an expedition to Greenland. This was 1965. I think there were 6 of us. The leader of it was a chap called John Ruckledge, who was a professor at the University of Toronto for many years, a mineralogy professor in the University of Toronto. And another member of the expedition was a chap called Simon Winchester, who subsequently became very famous as an author and as a journalist and author. He's written many books on a wide range of subjects. Anyhow, we put together this expedition under the Oxford Exploration Club and decided, in consultation with Wager, the thing to do was to go and look at the basalts south of Scoresbysund, which at that time were very poorly known. In fact, they were completely unknown, I would say. And it wasn't at all easy to get to this place in those days. In fact, it isn't at all easy to get there nowadays. But we got together all these stores in the basement at Oxford, and we were packing so-called sledging boxes, where we had rations in cardboard boxes that would last for, I think, 5 man days or something like that, or maybe 7 man days. And we put all this stuff on shelves in the rock store, and then we bought them from wholesalers, and then we put them divided them into the boxes, and Wager came down to see what we were doing, and we had all this stuff. We had jars of marmalade, and we had fancy biscuits, and we had breakfast cereals, and we had special margarine. And Wager said, "Good Lord, what's all this?" He said, "In my day we only had pemmican and porridge on expeditions." Anyhow, we stumbled upon the problem. Just then, we had to make application to the Greenland Ministry for permission for this expedition, and we made this application in January, and then about 14 days before we were due to leave, we got a sudden reply from the Greenland Ministry saying that the expedition couldn't take place because the Greenland Survey were planning to do something similar, and we would overlap with them. So we thought we can't possibly cancel the whole lot now. We'd already sent all the equipment off by sea to Copenhagen, and we decided something had to be done. So Simon and I went off to Copenhagen and enlisted the help of the British ambassador. I don't recall what his name was, an extremely aristocratic character, who, as we were talking to in the embassy, he smoked cigarettes constantly, and when the ash got to a certain length, a flunky came up with an ashtray and held it underneath his cigarette for him. Anyhow, he decided this was quite unacceptable, because it turns out that the agreement with Denmark was that Greenland would be open to British citizens. Whereas it was going to be closed. Those days it was a closed colony or a closed area, but it was open to certain nations, including Britain. They couldn't forbid us going, with basically what it was, and the ambassador saw this as a feather in his cap and something where he could make himself heard. So we turned up at the museum there, where in those days GGU had the top floor of the museum, and the director, Ellis Gord Rasmussen, had his room at the top of the stairs, where there was a big marble plate outside taken from Marmorelik.
Marmorelik is an old marble quarry in West Greenland that was mined in the 1930s, near a lead-zinc deposit that was later mined during the Second World War and later, and discussed by Emeritus Senior Scientist Bjørn Thomassen in a later episode.
And later on, many years later, I came to occupy the same room as an emeritus. Ellis Gord received us from the British ambassador, and the British ambassador laid down in no uncertain terms that Ellis Gord was not in a position to forbid us going, and so we got in that way. Anyhow, looking back on it, I'm really surprised that we didn't have some sort of serious accident on this trip, because we were real greenhorns. I mean, and we went off wandering up these glaciers. It was just amazing. Nobody fell down a crevasse and got lost. And well, we really didn't know what we were doing. We were dumped by a boat from Scoresbysund, nowadays it's Kotomit, on the south side of the fjord, and the agreement was we would be picked up for. I think we did have a radio, yes, they would pick us up later on, but we were left to our own devices. We walked across a whole load of mountains and then up glaciers, dragging a sledge after us, and drilled numerous basalt flows for oriented paleomagnetic samples, and collected profiles up Nunataks. And then, when we'd more or less finished, the weather set in, and I always remember this because we're at the foot of, I think it's called Tor Gletscher, and yeah, it's the first major glacier set on the Blossville coast going south from Scoresbysund. And we're in a camp there, and I always remember it because it was Friday the 13th of August, and the weather closed in and it began to blow rain, cats and dogs and everything we had got wet, and it was miserable. And so we decided we'd better make a retreat to the huts at Cap Brewster, which was like a day's march away. So we made a cache of a lot of stuff and put the rest of it on our backs and started off across the mountains to Cap Brewster. As I say, a day's march away. As we got higher and the time wore on, the rain turned to snow, and it was in effect a blizzard. We had no idea where we were going. It was a complete whiteout, and we could easily have got into trouble there. In fact, we overnighted in a cave that we cut out of a snowdrift, and next morning it was still visibility was next to nothing, but we succeeded getting down. And by that time we'd got to the position where we were going along in ones and twos. It was like every man for himself. And we got back to the huts there, and well, everything was okay except for the fact we didn't have much food, and it turned out we were stuck there for a long time because the pack ice had come into Scoresbysund and they couldn't come with the boat to pick us up. And so I think we were there for about 3 weeks, just hanging around and trying to subsist on what we had. Like, we had an abundance of Weetabix, I remember, but not much else. Anyhow, eventually we were picked up by this little boat, Enterlik, a fiskekutter.
A fishing boat?
From Scoresbysund. And we couldn't get out. We could only get out by walking across the ice. And they came to us as the light was going, and we walked across the ice several miles, I guess, across the ice out to where they had the boat. And it was all very, very dramatic, with flaming sunset. And the ice floes were packed tightly together, and between them there was new ice, and the Greenlanders who were with us, they went across these new ice without any trouble, but we were quite a bit heavier than they were, and we were also carrying heavy packs on our backs, and very often we broke through the new ice and went down into the water, which wasn't very pleasant. And then we got onto the boat. We couldn't get back to Scoresbysund because the ice had blocked us off, so we spent time sailing into the fjord, and we spent several days sailing in the inner reaches of Scoresbysund. And by this time we'd all run out of food. There was no food at all on the boat. The only thing we had was some yellow label Lipton tea bags, which we had in quite abundance. And so in desperation we managed to get hold of the colony bestuarer,
the colony governor,
and get permission to shoot a muskox, which we managed to get to the coast of Jamieson Land, and went running inland after the muskox herds and shot this muskox and dined on that. Well, that was all very well, but we'd been starving for days on end, and we ate several pounds of meat, and this didn't do us any good. And on top of that, as now we could sail along the coast, and as we were going across Herry Inlet, there was a powerful wind coming down Herry Inlet and steep waves, and the combination of the muskox meat and the sharp seas brought on the worst bout of seasickness I ever had, even though it was only a short distance across that fjord. I was violently ill, lying on the deck with waves coming over me, and been violently sick. Anyhow, we got to Scoresbysund okay, and anchored up there, and we thought we'd live on the buskocks, but we weren't allowed to do that. It was taken off us and given to the old folks' home. So we're back on our own rations again. Now, the ship couldn't get to Scoresbysund. It was stuck up by Denmark Town somewhere in heavy ice, and so they had to do without a ship that autumn. And that meant that we were stuck in Scoresbysund. Well, after a while, after we'd been there a couple of weeks or so, kicking our heels, not doing anything, wondering what the hell we were going to do, somebody told us it was possible to get a plane in who could take us out. And so we managed to get hold of this chap from Iceland, a chap called Paul Paulson, who came with a beechcraft and landed on a strip about, I guess, two hours walk out of Scoresbysund in a flat valley. I always remember walking out there and sitting by the side of this natural runway, and the wind was blowing. It was bitterly cold, and we were burning heather to try and keep warm. And we weren't at all sure whether the plane would turn up. Anyhow, in the end, we saw it was getting rather dark by this time. We saw a light in the sky, and the plane came down, taxied along the alluvial flats there, and came to a halt. And we jumped in. In fact, we could only half of us could go in it. So he took half of us to the strip at Mestersvik, and then went back for the other half. And then he had another plane at Mestersvik would take the whole party of us to Iceland. It was interesting when we got to Mestersvik, the first party. They had a big meal for us. Typical hospitality of these places. Yeah. I remember it was some kind of duck, and it was delicious. But the cook at Mestersvik was a chap called Søren Gericke, and the men at Mestersvik complained bitterly about him because they didn't get the sort of food they wanted. They said he gave them fancy food, and all they wanted was frikadeller and typisk dansk mad.
Meatballs and typical Danish food.
And it turned out later on that Søren Gericke was voted as the best cook in Denmark. He opened a restaurant in Gator,
a main street in central Copenhagen.
And this was the best restaurant in Copenhagen. And he'd worked for the Greenland television.
The Greenland Telecommunications Company.
Just to get experience of cooking for large numbers of people, apparently. Anyhow, that was that. We got back from Scoresbysund there all in one piece, so to speak. And but we didn't get the sample until the following year when the next ship got in. So we couldn't really work on it, which was a great hindrance. And by the time we got the specimen, our interest in the whole thing had rather lapsed.
I'm Julie Hollis, and you've been listening to Polar Podcasts. In the next episode, we hear from Emeritus Senior Scientist and Prospector Bjørn Thomassen about what drew him to Greenland and kept him coming back for 42 summers.